in Quebec today. But you're right, the focus in Quebec very much sort of going to be amplifying what we talked about earlier this morning, the particular help for seniors, allowing them to keep more of their income tax-free, up to $34,000 going forward, increasing the age. You can protect your RSP, keep it sheltered right now until age 71. The Conservative platform is going to propose increasing that to age 73 for those, again, who want to work, save more. And reassurance is also from the Conservatives that they aren't going to increase the retirement age as far as other benefits are concerned, CPP, old age security, and so on, from 65. That, of course, very controversial when the earlier Harper government did that. The Liberals switched it back to 65. So that on the agenda in Quebec. But as I was saying, the Bloc loves to talk about seniors and protect seniors. That's their voting base, the sovereigntist base. And there's always a game on in Quebec to be the alternative to the Federalist Liberals who are leading in the province now. So a bit of blue on blue action, right? The Bloc versus the Tories trying to be the top alternative to the Liberals. And so to see them fight that out with pitches to seniors, not a surprise to me.
Okay. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
We'll be talking again. Really interesting. The platform promises for today from the NDP and from the Conservatives. And what you're looking at here live is the scene in Windsor, Ontario. We remember during the Liberal leadership race, we had a key speech from Mark Carney there. We're also going to get an announcement from him in Windsor for the election campaign. And above is the Ambassador Bridge linking Windsor to Detroit in Michigan. 7.5 million vehicles go across that bridge over the course of the year. And 2.3 million of them, according to last year's numbers, are trucks. Commercial gateway, commercial link. This is the perfect place to talk about tariffs and trade and the impact of Donald Trump on Canadian economy and sovereignty. And, of course, as the leaders have been saying, which leader is the best to deal with that threat? So we will be listening in when we see Mark Carney there. We expect that in about 6 minutes' time. We'll take that live and the question and answer session with reporters as well to follow. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, his refusal to get security clearance is a big talking point on the campaign. We were reporting yesterday at this time that CSIS alleges India meddled in the Conservative leadership campaign by organizing support for Poilievre in 2022. This was his response yesterday.
Let's be honest. I won the leadership fair and square. Even my political competitors, like Mr. Patrick Brown, have publicly testified under oath that that was the case.
Poilievre's stand on getting a security clearance is a long-held one, and Jonathan Gatehouse this morning takes us through the history.
This all comes from a report published in the Globe and Mail, now confirmed by our colleagues at Radio-Canada, saying CSIS has determined that agents of the Indian government were allegedly involved in fundraising and organizing support for Pierre Poilievre's winning 2022 leadership bid. The exact nature and extent of the support within Canada's South Asian community has not been made public, but we are told that it didn't reach a level where it affected the outcome of the contest. Poilievre won easily on the first ballot. It's important to note that CSIS did not find any evidence that Poilievre or his team were aware of this clandestine effort, but it does add some context to the recent federal public inquiry into foreign interference, which found that the Indian government provided illicit financial support to various Canadian politicians in an attempt to gain influence and support pro-India candidates. In the spring of 2023, then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau offered to extend top-secret clearances to all the opposition leaders so that they could be briefed on the findings of an initial report into foreign interference. Pierre Poilievre declined then and has continued to refuse the offer ever since. Here's some of what he had to say.
I've already had a security clearance. What I will not do is have, because I was a cabinet minister, so I've already been cleared. What I will not do is commit to the oath of secrecy that the Liberals want to impose on me. They don't want me to be able to speak about these matters. So they bring me into a dark room and they'll say, we're going to give you a little bit of breadcrumbs of intel, and then we'll tell you you can't talk about any of this stuff anymore.
It's true that Poilievre did have security clearance when he was in cabinet a decade ago, but he would have to go through the approval process again in order to be briefed. And as far as the oath of secrecy goes, that's not something the Liberals would be imposing or directing. Access to classified information is overseen by CSIS, Canada's spy agency, a non-partisan body. It's also worth noting that the leaders of the NDP, Bloc Québécois, and the Green Party all received their security clearances and were briefed on the allegations of foreign interference, and that they all continue to speak out on the issue. Here's some of NDP leader Jagmeet Singh's reaction to the story.
Just the allegations alone should have prompted any leader who cares about our country to say, hey, I want to know what's going on. And the fact is, Pierre Poilievre could get to the answer of that right now. You could get security, could have months ago, could have years ago, got security clearance and found out what's going on. I think the real question is, why didn't he?
In fact, Poilievre could have received at least some of this information without getting his clearance at all. Last December, CSIS offered him a more targeted briefing on foreign interference as a threat reduction measure, something Poilievre again refused, contending that he wouldn't be able to legally act on any of the information he received. Jonathan Gatehouse, CBC News, Toronto.
Thank you, Jonathan. Really appreciate that. We have a CBC News fact-checking team, and Jonathan's a key part of that, so he'll be visiting us regularly during the campaign. If you have questions about the election, you can send an email as well to ask@cbc.ca. Talking about Pierre Poilievre, that leads into our next conversation. Catherine Cullen hosts The House on CBC Radio. She's also behind a brand new podcast called House Party, which we're going to talk about. But number one, let me say welcome to the program today, Catherine, on this day 4. I don't have enough time to ask you all the questions I have for you. But why don't we jump right in on Pierre Poilievre? Because on House Party today, you're looking at one of the key issues to surface so far in the campaign, the whole issue of whether Pierre Poilievre is in sync with Donald Trump. As Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has suggested, this goes back to the Breitbart interview from earlier this month and the suggestion that tariffs are boosting Liberal fortunes. Did she interfere, or has she interfered in an election campaign? Talk a little bit about what you're going to be discussing on House Party and how you see this as a prominent issue thus far.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, and it's particularly interesting that the framing is provided by the Alberta Premier herself. She is the one who said she sees Pierre Poilievre as being more in sync with the new administration. She was making these comments to an American audience. She said she has been telling Americans that they should basically lay off the tariff war, with the suggestion that perhaps it was helping the Liberals politically. And you have had some of her political opponents screaming, you are encouraging foreign interference, the very thing, as we just heard in some ways, that we have been trying to avoid in this country. What makes this more than just a question of what Danielle Smith said, though, is what this means for the federal election. It certainly was not very helpful for the Premier to make these comments about her political ally, because while Pierre Poilievre does have a significant portion of his base, about 1/3, depending on which opinion poll you look at, who likes Donald Trump, 2/3 don't. And of course, the vast majority of Canadians right now feeling less than impressed with the U.S. president, given his desire to absorb this country and inflict significant economic damage with the trade war. So it's a great discussion that we have today. Myself, Danielle Thibault from Radio Canada, Jason Marcussoff from Calgary, talking a bit about the implications of all this. And we do touch on that security clearance question too, Heather, because that is something that Mr. Poilievre has been wrestling with for some time. And you heard some interesting questions that Jonathan Gatehouse raised. We dig into those as well.
That sounds good. We'll just take a quick look at the live pictures that we're seeing on the screen. This is Windsor, Ontario, and we are awaiting Liberal leader Mark Carney with his latest platform announcement. So he's due to speak any time now, and we'll certainly be carrying that live. But as far as Mark Carney goes, I'm interested in what we're seeing, your perspective on the reporting this morning from our colleagues at Radio Canada. Many questions about Mark Carney's time in the private sector, most recently about his time at Brookfield Asset Management. And Radio Canada has come forward with reporting today about how he personally co-chaired 2 investment funds that were, again, they were registered in Bermuda, so a tax shelter. Lots of attacks from opposition, from rival parties, Conservatives and NDP. The Liberal Party isn't answering questions about finances or potential conflict of interest. How significant an issue, how much is this overshadowing Mark Carney at this point?
Well, I mean, this is a really interesting thing. Mark Carney has tried to make it a virtue that he has not spent his career in politics. And, when you look at those measures of trust, people don't necessarily have the most warm and fuzzy feelings about politicians as a whole. So he's been using his time as the governor of the Bank of England, the governor of the Bank of Canada, to make the case that he is the one who is best suited to deal with Donald Trump. But the thing is that track record is now being scrutinized during this election campaign, and it is creating persistent questions about Mr. Carney's record. Now, I will say some of the attacks that we have seen against Mark Carney, there are several degrees removed from what we know about what Mark Carney was doing and questions about, for instance, an insurance company that, Brookfield bought an insurance company that bought a parent company that bought a reinsurance company, and was Mark Carney responsible for the actions of that particular company in a case that goes back 10 years? Something like that. It's a little bit messy. It's hard to follow, and it's not clear that the chain of responsibility is established. In this particular case, our colleague Danielle LeBlanc is saying Mr. Carney personally co-chaired these two investment funds. Nothing illegal here. Plenty of companies, as is noted in the story, do use tax shelters, although interestingly, one of the political analysts that Dan LeBlanc spoke to said Brookfield, one of the biggest users of this kind of scheme, obviously to leverage profits. But it's just one of those things that people aren't necessarily going to love the look of. If you're using a country as a tax shelter, it's to avoid paying taxes in a country like Canada. We might understand that happens a lot in private business, but there's something particular if the person who is the prime minister of the country has been taking those kinds of actions. So I think he'll face questions about it today, and it looks like he's going to face questions about Brookfield all throughout this campaign, Heather.
Yes, indeed. So again, questions and answers with Mark Carney and reporters coming up from Windsor as part of the announcement. We're not seeing him yet, even meeting the workers who are assembled. Again, you can see protecting workers, so we get a sense of the announcement to come. But we haven't seen him yet. We will take that live just as soon as we do. I have another question about Mark Carney and some gaffes, Catherine. Yesterday, and we've been reporting this morning, the mix-up in names, Natalie Provost versus Pronovost, as Mark Carney said, Concordia University versus l'École Polytechnique, which he should have said in conjunction with the Montreal massacre. He mixed that one up. We had the announcement when he was named as the candidate running in Nepean. He said Bell's Corners was in Nepean. It wasn't in his riding. That was a bit of a flub, too. He's not taking part in the TVA French debate. What do we make of these gaffes as someone who's not run for political office prior? Is there anything more to be made of them? Is it a problem at all in Quebec, as Yves-François Blanchet has been insinuating? What do you think of all of this?
I'm going to be watching very carefully what happens with Mark Carney in Quebec. Not doing the TVA debate was a bit of a gamble because TVA has an enormous viewership. I believe it was 1.3 million people who watched the last face-à-face debate. Mark Carney's French is obviously imperfect. He sometimes struggles. You can see he's asked questions by reporters. He doesn't always understand the substance of the question. Perhaps sometimes that is about the audio in the room, but certainly there are questions about his ability. So on the one hand, it takes away a difficult moment from him. And the Liberals were, in some ways, able to do this because TVA was asking for a sort of pay-for-play deal. Parties had to pay $75,000 in order to participate in the debate. That's pretty unheard of. The Liberals have also talked about the fact that the Greens weren't being included as a reason for not doing it. Nonetheless, he has said no to a major appointment viewing moment in Quebec. Whether that sticks to him, not entirely clear. But then to be followed by this misstep, misstating twice Natalie Provost's name and confusing the Polytechnique massacre with a shooting in Concordia. The Polytechnique, it is such a touchstone in Quebec. Obviously a terrible tragedy, 14 women killed, 4 being women. That was the stated purpose of the killer. And, December 6th is still a day that is remembered every year in Quebec. It is a really, it is a cultural touchstone. And so that sort of like fumbling of that moment, combined with TVA, I'm interested to see whether Mr. Carney can get things back on track with Quebec. And we have to remember that is incredibly politically significant. We're talking about 78 ridings. Quebec seems to have made a big swing towards Mr. Carney based on what we're seeing in public opinion polls. A lot of that has to do with Donald Trump, questions about Canadian sovereignty and how that interacts with the French fact in North America. I think we need to see what happens next. How do Quebecers feel about this? And what are Mr. Carney's next moves? Will he sit down with Radio-Canada or TVA, perhaps, and do a French language interview to sort of reestablish his Quebec bona fides? If he does that, the stakes are certainly going to be high. So I just think it's a space to watch. It could be incredibly significant, or this could just be part of the day-to-day churn of an election campaign, Heather. We just don't know yet.
We just don't know. And again, yes, a touchstone in Quebec, but it is nationally honored.
Indeed.
To December 6th is the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. So it carries national significance as well. Listen, Catherine, while I have you, we have a 2-minute warning for Mark Carney. So until we see him, can we just carry on talking
Heather,
for a
whatever
moment?
you want to ask,
So,
let's do this.
Well, let's talk about where he is in Windsor. I mentioned that big speech that we saw in Windsor when he was running for the leadership, of course, but now we get a sense from what is on the podium there. It's going to be about workers. We know what's happening in Windsor, the auto industry hub for the country, the threat of tariffs, very real there. What do you think we're going to hear from Mark Carney here?
Well, certainly, I would say a few things about this. The word worker certainly catches my eye because of the political battle that's happening right now for workers. The NDP getting some big union boosts. The Conservatives got an endorsement from the Boiler Workers Union, I believe it was the other day, is one that they haven't had before. And this is all about the fight for labor votes. They obviously can be a real significant political force. Everybody wants a piece of that. Now, protecting workers could also, as you say, be very much about tariffs, specifically given the location. And Mark Carney has laid out some of his intentions vis-a-vis how he wants to protect workers in industries that are hurt by Donald Trump's tariffs. So things like making it easier to get EI faster, how any money from counter tariffs is reinvested. So I imagine, again, sort of leaning in on this. And I think if you want to sort of zoom out, the significance of this is also the sort of space Mark Carney is trying to occupy. Yesterday, it was very much about defense. Today, we're coming back to something that, again, speaks to international relations, Donald Trump and tariffs, because if that is the ballot box issue, it is more likely that Mark Carney will win this campaign. You hear Pierre Poilievre talking about things like tax cuts, creating homes, and it's not to suggest that the Liberals are not going to speak about that too. Mr. Carney has been very clear that that is something that is coming, but those affordability issues, if that is the primary ballot question for Canadians, the Conservatives have a better shot. If these are questions about Donald Trump, Mark Carney has a better shot. And it's not like this is all happening in a vacuum, Heather, right? Just look across that bridge. I'm not suggesting Donald Trump is in Detroit today. He's not. But the United States and the president, the possibility of April 2nd reciprocal tariffs, there's a lot to watch.
1 week today. Listen, your timing is impeccable. Thank you, Catherine, for all of that. We'll follow House Party. We'll follow the House. And now we are listening in live to Liberal leader Mark Carney in Windsor. This is CBC News Network.
Of the Spitfires. I want to be home of the Spitfires. There we go. Yeah, go Spits. And actually, go Spits. They're in the playoffs, right? They're going to have a good run, continuing in the tradition of Al Arbour and Glenn Hall and Marcel Pronovost. And it's great to be here with our two fantastic Liberal candidates, Chris Sutton and Eric Kuzmarek. And above all, it's great to be here in the home of the Canadian auto industry. You know, we're here today because of who's behind me. Proud union members, men and women who are the backbone of the Canadian auto manufacturing sector. And because they're at the backbone of that sector, they are the cornerstone of the Windsor economy, and they're what make Canada strong. And we're also here because of what's over there and what it represents, the Ambassador Bridge, a bridge that for almost a century has stood as a symbol of cooperation and of peace. It's also been a symbol of the greatest friendship between two countries the world has ever seen. And it's more than a symbol. It carries a quarter of all goods traded between Canada and the United States, 1/4 of all goods. That is $140 billion every year. It is $400 million every single day. It's an extraordinary achievement. It's an extraordinary friendship and economic partnership. Et maintenant, ces chiffres.
And now, those numbers and the jobs and the paychecks that depend on that are in question. The relationship between Canada and the United States has changed. We did not change.
President Trump's trade war has put the kinship that exists between our great nations under greater strain than at any point in our storied histories. And his trade war is hurting, and it will hurt more, American consumers and workers. I see that American consumer confidence is at a multi-year low today. And those American workers and consumers should be President Trump's concern. But his trade war also threatens to work and hurt hardworking Canadians, the people I care about, the people we care about. It threatens union workers like those behind me from Unifor, those down the 401 at auto assembly plants in Ingersoll and Oshawa and Oakville. It threatens people in Hamilton who are working in the steel mills and up in the Saguenay at the aluminum smelters. And like hundreds of thousands of Canadians who just want to earn a good paycheck and build a good life. It's understandable that Canadians are anxious. And that's why our new government has committed to use all of the revenues from our retaliatory tariffs against the United States, use all of those revenues to support Canadian workers. We've already turned that commitment into action. To support workers, we have temporarily waived the one-week employment insurance waiting period. We've changed the rules so that workers don't have to exhaust severance pay before collecting EI. We've made it easier to access EI, and we've made it more generous. I have announced that a new Liberal government will put more money in Canadians' pockets through a middle-class tax cut, a tax cut that will save a two-income family up to $825 a year. Because we know we're stronger together, because we know that, and we know that we're all in this together. Healthcare in Canada is a right, not a big business like it is across the river. Because we're all in this together, our government has created $10 a day childcare for hard-working families so that both partners can work. Because we're all in it together, we've created the Canadian Dental Care Plan that's already served 1.8 million Canadians and is poised to serve more than 5 million more. We know we must do more. And what I want to focus on, not surprisingly, is our auto industry. Autos are our #2 export in this country. It is a sector that supports 125,000 jobs directly and almost another 500,000 jobs in related industries. Many of them good union jobs. We have over 3,300 vehicles that roll off our assembly lines every single day. And the workers who build them contribute over $6 million in taxes every single day. Canadian auto workers don't just build vehicles, they build Canada. And our auto sector has always been there for our country. So in this time of uncertainty and need, Canada will be there for our auto workers. That is why today I'm announcing that the new Liberal government will create the Strategic Response Fund. And this is a $2 billion fund that will protect the jobs of workers affected by President Trump's tariffs. But it'll do much more than that. It will fortify the entire Canadian auto supply chain, from raw materials to finished vehicles. Because we're not just protecting the present, we're looking to build the future. We're creating new jobs. Under our plan, we will build an all-in Canada network for auto manufacturing components. Because on average, an auto part crosses that border, often through that bridge, over that bridge, 6 times before final assembly. And in a trade war, that's a huge vulnerability, tariff as it goes into the United States each time. So what we need to do is build more of those autos and more of each auto right here in Canada. In the new world, that will be an advantage. That will help insulate us from President Trump's trade threats. And it'll grow the economy right here in Windsor and across southwestern Ontario. We will
fortify the auto manufacturing supply chain and create a solid foundation for a strong economy. The good news, well, there's a lot of good news. We will be working with industries and Indigenous partners and other key stakeholders and governments to catalyze this opportunity for Canada.
Until today, it's taken too long to get important projects done. Projects that leverage Canada's abundance of natural resources, including critical minerals. We have to move faster to get them approved and underway. That all changes with my government. To make business in this sector easier and more efficient, we will establish a First Mile Fund. We announced this last Friday with the provinces. And what this fund will do is to provide capital to build transmission and transportation networks that link extraction sites to rails and roads. We'll also establish a one-window approval process. That means eliminating duplicative federal requirements by recognizing provincial assessments for major projects. One project, one review. And we will identify projects of national significance and accelerate the time it takes to build them. One project, one review, speed, size, it's time to build. Now, building will include building out critical minerals in the Ring of Fire in partnership with Indigenous peoples. It will include building out our ports, reinforcing and building the Port of Montreal, and new ports like Grays Bay in Nunavut. We will create complete supply chains for the future of our auto industry and new markets for it to sell into. Et finalement,
and finally, I am pledging to leverage government funding to prioritize and procure vehicles built in Canada so that we can catalyze domestic investment to grow the Canadian auto industry.
I'm committing that a new Liberal government will buy Canadian vehicles to grow our auto industry and create more good union jobs. We are building Canada strong, and our actions are supporting the work of nearly 500,000 Canadians who work directly or indirectly in this sector. We're supporting their families. We're supporting their communities. We're supporting this great country. That's the thing that President Trump just doesn't get. He wants to break us so America can own us. And it will never, ever happen because we don't just look out for ourselves, we look out for each other. That's what unions do. That's what the Liberal government is doing. Together, we will make Canada strong. Now, there is another person who just doesn't get it, and that's Pierre Poilievre.
Unlike the Liberals, he doesn't understand what you have to do in a crisis. He doesn't understand the leadership that Canadians want in difficult times. Canadians want positive leadership that unites them, not that separates them.
We're stronger together. Negative slogans aren't solutions. Anger isn't action. Division isn't strength. Pierre Poilievre's approach for division sounds familiar, doesn't it? That's because, as Premier Smith said, and I quote, Pierre Poilievre is very much in sync with President Trump. And someone who worships Donald Trump will kneel down before him, not stand up to him. Negativity won't win a trade war. It won't pay the rent or the mortgage, and negativity won't bring down the price of groceries. It won't protect good union jobs. Negativity won't make Canada strong. You know, finally, this is the most consequential election of our lifetimes. And Canadians have a clear choice. My government is meeting the moment with purpose, with partnership, and with force. And together, under a new Liberal government, we will build a stronger and more resilient auto industry. We will build and create more higher paying union jobs. We will build the strongest economy in the G7. We will build Canada strong. Merci, thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. We will now take questions. We'll take about 15 minutes of questions from the delegation and then local media. Vous allez prendre une quinzaine de minutes de questions de la délégation, puis ensuite des médias locaux. Première question, Fanny.
Okay.
Bonjour, Monsieur Carney. Fanny Olivier de Radio-Canada.
Hello, Mr. Carney. When you were in Brookfield, you were in charge of 2 green transition funds, which you registered in Bermuda. Now, I understand that using these types of paradises, of havens, tax havens, is not illegal, but is it moral? Well, in the case of Brookfield, I can tell you that the Caisse de dépôt and the Teachers' Pension Fund in Ontario, basically this is a method to secure returns for people who will benefit from these investments, such as the Caisse de dépôt and other pension funds in Canada. And the taxes are paid by individuals, as a matter of fact. That's the reality. Yes, but how can Canadians trust you to work against tax evasion when your own company used this method? No, it's a method that allows you to get the taxes paid in Canada by individuals. And I understand how the world works. And I abide by the rules and use those rules to fight real tax evasion, which...
The structure of these funds is designed to benefit the pension funds, the Canadian pension funds that invest in them. The Caisse de dépôt, Ontario Teachers is 2 examples. The beneficiaries of those pension funds, teachers, retirees, municipal employees, they pay the taxes on their pension. That's the design. The follow-up is how do I know? I understand how the world works and the structure works, and have the ability to put in place all of the necessary rules to ensure that the appropriate taxes are paid here in Canada, as is the case in the example that you just gave. The taxes are paid. Ils sont payés ici au Canada.
Taxes are paid here in Canada.
Hi, Mr. Carney. Tom Parry with CBC. Could I just follow up on that? Could you explain in the case of those Brookfield funds, like what was the argument for registering the funds in Bermuda? Is it ethical to do that? And is it something as Prime Minister that you'd have to crack down on? I'm not sure if it's a problem, but is that something that you'd have to crack down on?
I think the important thing, Tom, is that the flow through of the funds go to Canadian entities who then pay the taxes appropriately, as opposed to taxes being paid multiple times before they get there. So that's how we have the structure. That's the structure that all of our pension funds, for example, the Caisse de dépôt,
for example, the Caisse de dépôt,
or OMERS, municipal employees, or all the big pension funds in Canada, which are very successful, which protect union workers in many cases. I'm speaking of union workers today, and supply to them. It's those entities and their employees who are covered. So the structures work for that effect.
What's the advantage, though, of putting it into a place like
It ensures that it's an efficiency of a structure, so that ensures that the flow through goes to the entities that are resident in the countries.
But is it avoiding tax in any way?
It doesn't avoid tax because the tax is paid in, for example, the examples all I gave, the taxes are paid in Canada, yes. Okay.
Next question, back.
Hi, Mr. Carney. Mackenzie Gray with Global News. Just on your personal assets, do you have any, in Stripe and Brookfield, do you have any equity, stock options, or anticipate any future payments from either 2 of those companies?
So the first thing to say with respect to my personal assets is I have complied with all of the rules. In fact, I've over-complied with all of the rules in advance so months and months and months in advance, and put in place both divestitures. So I actually don't own directly any stocks in those companies, but since I had worked at those companies, I put in place ethical screens. So my approach to public life, and I've been in public life for more than 2 decades, is to meet all the standards and surpass the standards with the highest integrity. And my record, you can look at it, my track record is that as Governor of the Bank of Canada and other roles internationally. So I comply with the rules. Pierre Poilievre has had 927 days to get his security clearance and still hasn't bothered to do that. And I think it shows a fundamental difference in approach. I more than comply in advance. He never complies.
With respect to my assets, I no longer have any assets in those 2 companies, but I have already established a conflict screen in order to better protect the perception of a conflict. All my business was in order or put in order well before it was necessary, but in the case of Mr. Poilievre, he has done nothing. For more than 927 days. No security clearance, which is strange, and it's not acceptable. You have to accept that kind of thing. It's not responsible not to do it in a moment of crisis.
Talk directly right now, but I'm talking about in the future. So I just want to come back to this again.
Well, I'm not going to own, just to be clear, sorry if I may, just to be clear, I own nothing now. I came into public life at a time of crisis. I put my hand up because of the crisis, because of what's represented by that bridge, what's represented by the threats to these good men and women of Unifor and their colleagues across southwestern Ontario and across Canada. I came in. What I've done is put all my affairs in order, well in advance. I own nothing but cash and personal real estate. So, and that's not going to change. In public life, that's not going to change. It's actually quite straightforward.
So then, just to be clear then, going forward, you have no potential equity stake, no potential stock options, or any other potential future payments that you currently anticipate could come from either Strike or Brookfield?
So what I have is cash, personal real estate, and their assets all those assets were divested into a blind trust, which is managed by a trustee, and it literally means exactly what it says. I don't know what's in it. En français pour la dernière partie, madame?
On the last part, so there is a blind trust that was created, and I don't know what assets are in it, because there is a trustee who manages the assets.
Vas-y.
Bonjour, Monsieur Carney.
Hello, Mr. Carney. With respect to the mistake you made yesterday talking about Polytechnique, is this an indication that perhaps you don't know very much about Quebec? Do you feel that you are familiar enough with Quebec? Well, first of all, I very much regret making that mistake. Obviously, I expressed myself poorly, and I have a great deal of gratitude to Nathalie for agreeing to join our team and work with us. I love Quebec. I'm not a Quebecer. Obviously, I come from Alberta, and that's why my French is far from being perfect. But I love Quebec. I love the language and the culture, its history, and its initiatives, the entrepreneurship in Quebec, and I'm very much engaged with Quebec. For example, I launched my economic campaign in Mauricie, in Quebec, And I'm spending more time in Quebec. I spent more time in Quebec during the leadership campaign than anyone else. And in your inner circle, do you have Quebecers who are part of that team who are advising you on the particularities of Quebec? Well, for example, we have a cabinet of 23 ministers, and 6 are from Quebec. The Minister of Finance, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity, and a number of others. And within my own team, I have a number of people from Quebec who are advising me. But in your campaign team, the people advising you, yes, I have Pascal Desrosiers, Janet Surette. There are quite a few. We have a team of more than 150 people now, a big team, a strong team involving Quebecers.
Specifically about your regrets for making that mistake yesterday, and whether or not it shows perhaps a shortcoming in terms of your language as well as understanding of Quebec issues.
Well, I wouldn't say I very much regret that I misspoke yesterday. You know, the horrors of the December 6th massacre at the Polytechnic are very much still with us, and the lessons are still to be fully learned. In fact, I just had a conversation this morning around related issues of conjugal violence. I'm extending the point, but it's there. It's not that was not a question of language. That was a question of misspeaking, and to follow up on the previous question, or to translate the previous question for you, response. Look, we have a very strong Quebec team. I'm very proud. We have 6 of our ministers, and I won't list them all, senior ministers of a cabinet of 23. So more than a quarter of the ministers are from Quebec. Within the 150 members of our team, very senior Quebec representation. I have very strong ties into Quebec society as well. It's, of course, I'm not from Quebec. Not everyone is from Quebec. I'm come from Alberta. I'm born in the north, and my French is fine, but it's not perfect.
Mr. Carney, I'm Judy Trin with CTV News. We have confirmed that Chandra Arya was disqualified because of foreign interference, specifically related to his meeting with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Given the fact that you have security clearance, can you tell Canadians why that is a concern? And the Liberals have yet to put up a full roster of candidates in all 343 ridings. What is the possibility that foreign interference is impacting that selection of candidates, either from India, China, Russia, Iran?
Let me go. I'm going to deal quickly with the first part of your question, if I may, which is that one of the things, and I've had security clearance for almost 2 decades in various forms at various times. One of the things about having security clearance is you don't then take information that you have from security clearance and repeat it to others. This is something Mr. Poilievre wouldn't know because he doesn't have his security clearance. And first point. Second, with respect to the Liberal candidates, I'll say 2 things. One is, we have a very robust and serious process of vetting candidates. And we take it very seriously, and so there are some candidates that we don't, to use our terminology, green light, we don't approve, and that is the case with Mr. Arya. There is tremendous interest in joining our candidate slate. We have a remarkable slate of candidates. I will just note the announcement yesterday of Sean Fraser coming in. I could point to Gregor Robertson, Natalie Provost, as we talked about earlier, Evan Solomon, Tim Hodge, like just a huge range of interest of people running for this team. And it's because of 2 things, if I may. One, it's a time of crisis, and people recognizing that in their own way they want to step up and help our country, and I salute them for it. And secondly, because the Liberal Party uniquely sees that we're all in this together. So it's a strong economy, but it's a strong social safety net. It's good union jobs and reinforcing those jobs. It is providing support for Canadians who can't afford it. So we don't say, as Mr. Poilievre said yesterday, oh, I guess dental care, some people actually do use dental care, so if you've got in under the window now, you can keep it. But everyone else, it's too late. It's too late. Oh, and by the way, if you're using childcare, forget about it. This is what's bringing people to the Liberal Party. And we have an incredible group of candidates. I'm very proud of them. And we will have a great team in government.
You're in an area that back in 2022 was the site of a week-long blockade by people who were angry about the Trudeau government's COVID policies. What do you say to those Canadians who lost trust in the Liberal government back then and do not have trust in you now because of your affiliation with that party?
Well, look, I haven't been a politician. I became a politician 2 months ago, a little more than 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago. And I came in because I knew this country needed big change. We needed big change in the economy. We needed big change in how we supported people. We needed big change to deal with Trump. And I think you've seen that in the short time that my government has been in place, that big change. We canceled the consumer carbon tax. We got rid of the capital gains tax. We put in place a series of protections for workers with respect to the Trump tariffs, whereas Mr. Poilievre would just use all of that money that belongs to them because they're the ones who are being hit, use them to cut taxes for others. We extended dental care. We negotiated new security partnerships with our oldest partners in France and the UK. I could go on, but Mr. Chase is waiting. Part of how you re-earn trust, and I understand the frustrations of those people, I understand the frustrations with respect to the cost of living. Part of the way you earn trust is by action. And what this government is all about is action. Steve, I'm sorry.
Last question to Steve before turning to
Hi,
local.
Steve Chase from the Globe and Mail. I got one question and one follow-up. The first question is about these issues that Mr. Poilievre raised yesterday. He's suggesting you're beholden to China. He talked about your regular visits to China. You went there at the time when Xi was trying to show the world that he's open for business. You went back in the fall. And then Brookfield secured a $276 million loan for some property there, I guess that was underwater. Was that a sweetheart loan? Are you beholden to China?
Absolutely not. First thing. Second thing I'll say, look, Mr. Poilievre doesn't understand the world. Mr. Poilievre is a lifelong politician. It's all he's ever done. These slogans, sound bites, slander, doesn't understand how the world works. China happens to be our second largest trading partner. It's our second largest trading partner. We have trade disputes with China right now. Caused by them in the agriculture sector. It's one of the areas which we need to engage on. It's one of the areas, when you think about, again, the auto sector and the future of the auto sector, we've got to understand where China is, where China is going, whether or not there's any room for partnership in that. Look, I'm beholden to absolutely no one except to the Canadian people. I am here for the Canadian people. Steve, your follow-up?
Yeah, follow-up.
Continue. Continue.
The Chinese ambassador's given, I think, 3 or 4 interviews in the last few weeks talking about his interest in reopening free trade talks. My question for you is, as we try to diversify away from the United States and reduce our reliance on our trade with the United States, is it your belief that we should be increasing our trade with China?
Look,
and reopening free trade talks.
Here's my view on this broader set of issues. We need to diversify our trade as a country. We are over-reliant on, as wonderful as the trade going across that bridge, we are over-reliant on the United States. I think it's a lesson we've all learned. We need to diversify. We want to diversify with like-minded partners. That's why I went to Europe in my first days as Prime Minister. I spoke first with European President von der Leyen, obviously met with the French President, and then separately, because it's not part of Europe anymore, as you know, the United Kingdom, in terms of building trade with them. There are partners in Asia that we can build deeper ties. There is certain activity that, but the partners in Asia that share our values don't include China. There's certain activity that we could have with China. We obviously do have a large amount of trade with them, but we have to be very careful, very deliberate, and they need to meet Canadian standards. Okay, merci.
Monsieur Carney, est-ce que vous pouvez traduire votre réponse sur la Chine, s'il vous plaît?
Your answer on China, please.
Pardon, la dernière partie de...
Juste, si vous pouvez traduire votre réponse sur
If you could just... whether you're compromised or not. No, not at all. I am here working for Canadians. Mr. Poilievre is becoming increasingly angry and desperate. He's inventing all sorts of things.
He's a conspiracy theorist. Spends too much time with his MAGA friends, and he comes up with whatever he can think of. I'm beholden to the Canadian people. I'm proud to be working with my colleagues at a crucial time for our country. And I'll say one last thing. We have a positive agenda for this country. We are bringing Canadians together to build. Yes, the auto sector is under threat, but what today is about is building the future of the auto sector together. That's the positive agenda, not coming up with slander of the day. Thank you very much.
Two quick questions from local.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good morning, Rob Hindy from AM 800. I'm guessing Eric and Chris and the union officials behind you have told you how these tariffs will impact Windsor Essex. So your message to Windsor Essex, your supporters and undecided voters as well.
Yeah, so the message is clear. We are absolutely laser focused on this issue. We are laser focused on the issue. You have two great individuals behind you and direct lines of communication to me in the cabinet to make sure that we're taking action. So we have done several things in order to put in place the support that's necessary. I won't go to all of them, but a bunch of financing facilities for the companies that work here so that they can continue to operate while we're negotiating a better deal for Canada. That's the first thing. I mentioned the support for workers. But what we're also doing, and I think this is crucial, is we're not waiting. Because one of the things we're learning is that on the other side of the bridge, they're a little volatile. They're a little up and down, a little bit on and off, hot and cold with respect to the relationship. So what we're looking to do is take control of our destiny, build more here, build more of the supply chain here in Canada, create stronger ties, more jobs for the future. And that's what the $2 billion strategic fund that we're announcing today and the links to a number of other programs. This is going to go directly to companies to make investments to build Canada strong. And that's the message. So it's not about waiting until the Americans become more reasonable. It's about acting now, and that's a far better place to be. Take control of our destiny.
Last question, dernière question.
Good morning, Mark. This is Pratish from CBC News Windsor. Are there any plans for the Liberal Party to put up a candidate in Windsor West?
Absolutely. We will have a great candidate. Look, we have just in terms of candidates, we're in the last weeks of candidate selection. We, as I said before, we have a fantastic team. I'm so proud to be associated with them, and it is truly a team that's coming together to work for Canadians. And that's what Canadians expect. We're all coming together. We're stronger together. And the Liberal Party is stronger for you. Thank you very much. Merci
Thank you.
beaucoup.
This was Senate's press conference.
We have been listening in to Liberal Party leader Mark Carney as he's speaking in Windsor, Ontario. We know that has been a strategic place for many politicians to be speaking as Canada continues with the trade war with the U.S. and how important the auto sector is to that community. Hello and welcome inside the CBC Newsroom. I'm Arti Pol. Today, as we heard, new pledges of support for Canadians from party leaders as they ramp up their campaigns. Lower taxes for seniors, funds for auto sector workers, equity in the tax system for lower income earners. That is just some of what we will be hearing today. Liberal Party leader Mark Carney, as we saw, just spoke a short time ago in Windsor, Ontario. He outlined a plan for auto workers staring directly into the U.S. tariff threat. We know we are expecting to hear from Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre as he is going to propose help for seniors. He'll be speaking in Quebec. And then you can see there we'll also be hearing this hour from the NDP's leader Jagmeet Singh about newly released plans to bring more fairness to the tax system. We've got it all covered for you. And at this announcement this morning with the Liberal Party leader, Mark Carney, we know that he wanted to focus in on those new supports for auto sector workers impacted by U.S. tariffs. But the focus did turn during the question-answer period to Carney's time in the private sector and missteps made while speaking about a Montreal candidate. I do want to bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor. As usual, she's following along with us, and she's going to go through this announcement that we heard a short time ago and a little bit more about what we heard during the question and answer period. Janice.
Yeah, because we've got 3 or 4 stories on the go here. So let's just step through this together piece by piece. So the reason to be in Windsor, the new offer on the table for Canadians who are worried about the effects of Donald Trump's tariffs. A lot of language in his public remarks about basically what Liberals want to be the ballot question in this election. Who's best to respond to tariff threats? Who's best to lead Canada in this moment when its economic sovereignty, or maybe its sovereignty generally, is imperiled now by a fracturing, tense relationship with Washington. The solution to those questions in the Liberal campaign is Mark Carney. But they have granular kind of forms of assistance that they are rolling out as campaign planks as well. Mark Carney today was kind of re-announcing, echoing something they unveiled with the premiers. It was late on a Friday. You might have missed it, but this new idea of having what they call a first mile fund, additional assistance for trade corridors to help make it easier to get natural resources you'd want to use in supply chains.
Sorry, Janice, I'm going to have to interrupt you because the NDP leader is starting to speak in Hamilton, Ontario. We will get back to Janice in just a moment, but we do want to listen right now to Jagmeet Singh.
We did not start, but we've got to fight back and defend our country, might mean that the costs are going to go up even higher. So we have a plan to fight back against that, a plan to fight back to give people relief. But just to talk a bit more about what it is right now, what it feels like right now with the high cost of living, I wanted to invite Michelle to share a bit of what it's like, how expensive things are, and why it's so important for us to fight back with a plan to give folks like Michelle and thousands of people like Michelle out there across Hamilton, Ontario, and across Canada, something that will help them know that, we're fighting for you and here's a plan to give you relief. So maybe Michelle, you can talk a bit about what it's like right now for you and what you're feeling when you look at the bills, when you go buy groceries, when you're paying your monthly bills. What is it like for you?
Sure. Well, it's very tough. So like many Canadians, I am a single mother. I work, so it's a little bit hard, to juggle the working life and raising a child. But I have to work a lot more hours than I used to now to be able to make ends meet. So it's a struggle. It's hard. I feel guilty not being able to spend much time with my daughter as I used to. And then it's also, difficult because my daughter is 14 years old, but she's also special needs. She has autism. So she's not able to take care of herself. So she's at an age where there is no child care. Like, what do you do after school? She can't walk home. She can't take care of herself. So I pick her up and I usually just work at home. Like, I've gotten a flexible job now where I can work my own hours, but it means I have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I have to work an hour, 2 hours before I get her ready for school. I have to bring her to school. I go to the office, I work, and then I pick her up, make dinner, and then a lot of the times I work till almost bedtime just to pay my bills. So it's definitely a struggle that a lot of Canadians are going through.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been through a lot of situations like, rent evictions. I went through 4 years straight with homes being up for sale, which has been pretty difficult. So it's I've had to move twice now. So now you're, moving into smaller places, but you're spending hundreds of dollars more. So that means you got to work more. That means you got less time for your family. So it's just definitely a very, hard situation that a lot of people are going through. It's just tough nowadays to afford everything.
Tell me a bit about groceries. Like we were chatting about the grocery bills. It's one of those bills that we really worry about now, like trying to get everything that your family needs. What's that like for you?
Exactly. Well, it's more difficult. It means that, you have to watch what you buy now. Sometimes you choose different stores or you buy stuff on sale. Sometimes you choose to buy different things. So it's definitely different than what it was, 5 years ago. I never even thought about food. And, now you have to think about, a lot of stuff. Yeah.
And what would it mean for you to be able to get some relief? Like if you were able to save on your taxes, if you were able to get relief, what would it mean for you and your family to know that things would cost a bit less? Like what would that do for you?
It would mean a lot. It would mean that maybe I wouldn't have to work so much. You know, I can do more stuff with my daughter. I can spend more time. I wouldn't have to feel as, you know, guilty working as many hours as I could. So it definitely would be, you know, a help for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents relate to that feeling of guilt as a mom or a dad that we're not able to spend as much time with their kids because we got to work so hard. And so, you know, for you, Michelle, and for folks out there listening, this is what our plan is. We want to fight back against that uncertainty. And folks are like, well, you know, things are already so hard. It's only going to get harder if the trade war drives up the cost of groceries and other bills. So here's our plan. This is what we want to do. First off, for the first $19,500 that someone earns, no tax on that. We want to make sure zero on that, and to give some people some more relief that way. So for the first $19,500 that people earn, zero tax. And that'll give people a savings. We want to take the GST permanently off of your monthly bills that are essential. So that would be your internet, your cell phone, your home heating, and take it off of daily necessities like grab-and-go groceries, so like a rotisserie chicken at the grocery store, and children's clothing. And then for seniors and people living with disabilities, we know that the impact of things getting more expensive is going to hit them even harder. So we want to plan to lift up seniors. So we want to double the disability credit, so the disability benefit, and that disability benefit needs to be increased. We want to double it. And then we want to increase the GIS. That's going to help a lot of seniors lift them out of poverty by increasing the GIS. Our plan helps middle-class folks the most. And the difference is that we've noticed from the other plans that are out there, the Liberals and Conservatives, their plan is one that helps millionaires the most. Mark Carney put forward a plan that's going to help millionaires more than it helps people like you, and I think that's wrong. Pierre Poilievre, same thing. His plan is going to help out the richest Canadians more than it helps out middle-class, middle-income folks. Again, I think that's wrong. And so that's our plan. Our plan is one, to fight back, to give you relief, and with these three pillars, I think it's going to really help people out. In total, at a minimum, it's going to save $1,450 for families. And that's, you know, $1,450 more back in your pocket. And I think that's the right thing to do right now. It's going to help us weather the storm of this trade war and the potential uncertainty that comes with it. And I'm looking forward to putting forward more and more plans that put people first, not the billionaires or not the CEOs, but everyday folks like you, Michelle. And I'll do that again in French, and then we'll take some questions from the media. Donc, on a entendu le plan de Michel, la situation de Michel.
We heard about Michel's situation, and in these tough times, there are people like Michel and other Canadians who are worried because life is already too expensive. It costs too much to buy groceries, to pay your rent, and pay your bills. And with Donald Trump's threats, obviously, that means that the cost of living could go up even more. And that would make it very tough for families in the current circumstances where people are having trouble making ends meet. So we have a plan to stand up against Donald Trump's attacks and defend people. Our plan is threefold. First, for the first $1,950, you will pay zero taxes on that amount. That will help families. And our plan will help disproportionately members of the middle class, because we believe that those are the people who need the help. Second, we will remove the GST permanently on monthly bills and essential items. I'm talking about food, no GST on prepared foods, on your cell phone bills, on your internet and heating bills. We will remove the GST there. And finally, we know that with the current uncertainty, that means that there is a potential for higher inflation, and that means that the most vulnerable will be the most impacted. So we want to double benefits, and for seniors, we want to increase the OAS for vulnerable Canadians. That will help people that will make it possible to lift seniors out of poverty, and we will help the middle class and everyday Canadians. Now, with respect to the Liberal plan and Mark Carney, his plan will help millionaires more than the middle class. And with Pierre Poilievre, it's the same thing. His plan will also help millionaires more than the middle class, and I think that's wrong.
And just closing up, I want to point out something. We learned recently that Mark Carney was personally responsible for 2 funds. He's the chair of Brookfield Investments, but he's personally responsible for 2 funds totaling $25 billion. And while he was chair, he chose to register those 2 funds, even though they're Canadian, he chose to register them in Bermuda for the sole reason of avoiding paying taxes. Right now is tax season. Hardworking Canadians are paying their taxes. They can't choose to register in Bermuda to avoid paying taxes. They got to pay them here. And they do that because they believe that we contribute to our healthcare system. We contribute to taking care of each other. When we pay our taxes, we're paying into a program that lifts each other up. Well, Mark Carney was not just the chair of this entire company, but personally responsible for these 2 funds. He chose to register in another country to avoid paying those taxes. That's less money for healthcare, less money for seniors. That's less investments in our country. And so now, just a couple months later, he wants to be prime minister. A couple months ago, he was avoiding paying taxes in our country, and now he wants to be prime minister. It makes me wonder, is he going to be working for families, for people like Michelle, or is he going to continue to favor the companies that he worked for, like Brookfield? Is he going to allow them to get away with skirting, paying their fair share? Allow them to continue to register in other countries so that they don't pay their fair share? Will he favor those companies, or will he stand up for Canadians? I think these are fair questions, and I think it disturbs me, and I'm sure Canadians are going to hear that and be disturbed as well. Donc finalement, je veux dire que
So finally, what I'd like to say is in the tax season, and of course it is important to pay one's taxes because you're contributing to the common good and to our healthcare system. You're contributing to pensions. So we have to look out for each other. And we've just learned that Mark Carney was responsible for 2 funds of some $25 billion when he was the chair of Brookfield Investments, and he decided to register those 2 funds in other countries, in Bermuda, to avoid paying taxes in Canada. Just a few months ago, he was still chair of that company, and now he is running as a candidate to become Prime Minister of Canada. And I think that raises questions. Will he continue to favor big corporations like the one he was chair of a few months ago, or will he be there for people? So I think this raises a lot of questions. It's a concern. I'm concerned about it. I'm sure Canadians are concerned as well.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. We'll take the question from the press, 1 question and 1 follow-up by each reporter. On va prendre les questions de la presse, une question et une question de suivi. On va commencer avec Juliane Lapointe, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh. Justement,
Mr.
sur
Singh,
le sujet dont vous venez de parler,
on the subject you just addressed, in light of what Daniel Leblanc is telling us today, what do you think Mark Carney should do? What concrete steps should he take now? Well, I think what his record shows, and we're getting increasing evidence of this, it shows that he is there to defend the interests of the ultra-rich. And that is the question I raised at the beginning. I think there is more and more information coming out that shows that. The fact that he took advantage of the housing crisis, and this was a deliberate strategy to find affordable housing, buy those buildings, and then raise prices, to basically exploit people who are working hard. And I think that calls into question his real priorities. Is he there for you? Or is he there to protect the profits of large corporations? And this new information, the fact that he deliberately, a few months ago, he was the chair of that company, he was responsible personally for those two funds, and he deliberately chose to register those funds in another country to avoid paying tax. That's not good leadership. That's not someone putting Canada's interests first, because we know that taxes contribute to our healthcare system, our pensions, and services for Canadians. So he decided to avoid contributing, even though this is a Canadian company. So all of this shows that he is not there for you. And I'm here to say I am there for you. I'm here for everyday Canadians.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing again and again is just more examples of Mark Carney showing Canadians that he's not in it for you. Like, he was the head of a company that profited off of the backs of Canadians during the housing crisis. And that was a strategic decision of his entire company, to find affordable buildings where people were paying, hardworking people were paying affordable rent, to buy those buildings and jack up the rent, to make profits off the backs of people. And now we've learned that he was personally responsible for two funds totaling a significant amount of money that on purposely set up and registered in another country to avoid paying taxes. And I think all this questions who he's in it for. Is he really in it for you, or is he in it for the super rich? And I think there's more and more proof showing us that he's not in it for you, that he's in it for the folks that he worked for before, the company that he worked for before, not for you.
Vous n'avez pas dit ce que vous allez faire concrètement, mais mes collègues vont se faire un plaisir de vous relancer là-dessus.
You're going to take, but I'd like to change subjects. Mr. Singh, why were you so cautious in your comments about Mark Carney's comments on Polytechnique? Is that because you don't think it was serious? Your team decided not to comment on what Mark Carney said, and the fact that he misspoke in saying Nathalie Provost's last name and with respect to Polytechnique as opposed to Concordia. Your team decided you wouldn't comment. So I'm wondering if it's because you think it's not serious. No, it's very serious, because what happened at Polytechnique was absolutely horrible, and everyone in Canada, everyone knows when that happened. It was one of the most horrible attacks and tragedies that's occurred. This was an attack on women, and this is an example of the dangers of violence against women and young girls. I have a daughter myself, and I know that we live in a country and in a world where there is more violence against women and girls, and I will do everything I can to ensure that my girls have a future, that they're not victims of violence. And the fact that the Prime Minister did not remember the worst attack against women and mixed up events. The Polytechnique attack was in fact a horrible massacre aimed at women, and we all have a responsibility to always remember what happened and to pledge to do everything we can to put a stop to this kind of violence against women. And the fact that a candidate for the prime ministership would have forgotten the history of this country and the history of Quebec and not know the difference between Polytechnique and Concordia shows that he doesn't take violence against women seriously.
This is very serious. One of the most horrible attacks in the history of our country against women was the attack, the massacre of women at École Polytechnique. It's engraved in the memories of Canadians. And to mix that up with another school, I mean, this is something that people remember exactly where they were the moment they found out about this attack. we have all a collective responsibility to fight back against violence against women. I'm a dad of 2 daughters. I want my daughters to grow up safe. I don't want them to be in any way victims of violence. And we all have a collective responsibility to fight back against violence, to make sure women and young girls are safe. And for a Prime Minister candidate to not remember or to mix up something as serious as that, this is the most serious attack and massacre of women in our history. It's something that everyone in Quebec knows about. And to mix them up shows that he's out of touch with Quebec and out of touch with the historic tragedies that have happened in our country.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Hi, Mr. Singh, Taria, Isri Global News. We're in Hamilton, nicknamed Steel Town, and it's arguably the city most affected by the tariffs that are currently in place. So why is there no policy announcement on tariff relief?
We have been listening to NDP leader Jagmeet Singh as the party announced a plan to cut taxes for working and middle-class families and permanently remove the GST from daily essentials such as grocery store meals, diapers and strollers, plus monthly bills including cell phone, internet and heating bills. Now, as he's done at other campaign events, we saw that he sat down with a community member who shared their story and then unveiled his plan sort of to demonstrate how his party's platform would help Canadians. But of course, as we heard there, Singh also raised reporting by Radio Canada and CBC News that while the Liberal Party leader Mark Carney co-chaired 2 investment funds during his time in the private sector before entering politics, those funds were registered in Bermuda. I do want to bring back the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. She's been listening along with me. Okay, so for our viewers, we are going to dive into a few different things here. Lots of questions about that CBC News reporting on the Liberal Party leader, and we will get to that in just a moment. But first, let's also talk about the announcement from the NDP, sort of a way he says in order to differentiate himself from the Conservatives and the Liberals when it comes to really targeting the middle class and lower income earners.
That's right. The NDP are kind of the last of the 3 national campaigns to come out with their tax policy. Of course, we heard Mark Carney's proposal to lower the tax on the bottom income tax bracket by 1% on Sunday. Then on Monday, we had the more significant cut to the bottom tax rate from Pierre Poilievre. Now today, they briefed it first. We were talking about it earlier on CBC News Network. The NDP is taking a bit of a different approach, much more kind of targeted sort of at more vulnerable parts of the population and the tax base. But essentially, they are not going to play with the bottom bracket. They are looking at the basic personal amount. If you filed your taxes, there is a certain quantity that no one pays any tax on. Right off the bat, that's subtracted from your income for the year. The NDP are proposing in their platform, raise the basic personal allowance up to $19,500. That is a significant jump. It would help people who earn between $19,500, their new kind of basic personal amount, up to those who make $177,000 a year. So a pretty wide swath there of Canadian taxpayers and earners. They say it would save everyone in that group about $505 a year, this tax move. But then they are going to start phasing things out pretty dramatically for income earners higher than that, because they are going to have a lower basic personal amount for high income earners. And then on top of that, they're going to offer no benefit for people who make over $235,000 annually. So wanting to sort of make a very progressive move here, they say that their change would add up to an annual sort of cost to the Treasury of about $10 billion. That kind of puts it squarely in the middle of sort of what the Liberals announced on Sunday and what the Conservatives announced on Monday. The Liberal costing is just shy of $6 billion. The Conservative costing, by the time it's all implemented a couple of years from now, would be about $14 billion. So they're coming in the middle in terms of the cost of their tax cut. But then on top of that, as you say, they are proposing to permanently pull the GST off a bunch of stuff. You might remember we had sort of the holiday to the GST in some limited ways for a brief period of time from the Liberals. That, of course, was an idea. Actually, it's an idea that goes back to an old Conservative platform. and then Jagmeet Singh proposed it this fall. Now they are saying permanently eliminating it on, as you say, home energy bills, cell bills, children's clothes and footwear, which was part of the holiday, and prepared meals from the grocery store, which was also part of the holiday. Now, how much does that cost? Well, they say it would be about $4.5 billion a year, but they think it would save the average family of $448 annually. So, helpful. And then finally, though, with respect to the you might say most vulnerable among us, they are proposing significant increases to the Canada Disability Benefit and the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors to help lift more of those folks out of poverty. And again, those would cost between $3 and $4 billion annually. So that is their vision kind of on the fiscal front from New Democrats. All of the parties now putting this in the window very early in this campaign, knowing that affordability, cost of living, very much on people's minds. But from Jagmeet Singh's perspective, notwithstanding the fact they briefed people on this early as the nature of the story of the day, you saw how all the questions to him were about these other stories, right? Looking for him as an opposition voice to react to what was going on, in the Mark Carney camp, for example. So we can start to unpack those next.
And let's do that, because I did have to interrupt you as we were talking about Mark Carney and the questions that he was facing during his announcement in Windsor, Ontario. For our viewers, things are coming in fast and furious. And so we want to bring you the announcements and break down those details. And then we also want to go through the questions that are being asked and offer some context too. So, Janice, we were in the middle of talking about Carney's approach also that he announced in terms of trying to contend with the trade war and with the tariffs, new supports for people working in the auto sector, but really a lot of questions about that reporting from CBC News about his time in the private sector, those investment funds, and also about those missteps that he made in Montreal.
Yeah, and really interesting here this morning to see our colleagues, our Francophone colleagues, very in deep, sort of in the questions about the way he misspoke about the Polytechnic shooting, for example. Let's get to that second. The Brookfield stuff first, though. As you mentioned, our colleague Danielle LeBlanc out this morning with a story about the way Brookfield Asset Management used tax havens for a number of its clean green tech investment funds. We are all in this campaign going through a bit of an education in terms of global asset management and how this works. But essentially, the nature of the story is to highlight that sort of, as the chairman of the board of this global asset manager, some of the sort of funds that sort of he ultimately was overseeing were making use of things like Caribbean kind of tax havens to shelter their investments, let them grow tax-free. Mark Carney, though, when taking questions about this today, sort of walked us through kind of how this works and why Canadians should sort of think about this in a more nuanced way. Because he pointed out that people who manage the investments are in kind of the asset management game, including the assets of very ordinary working class folks, like the teachers' pension plan in Ontario, for example, Quebec's Caisse de dépôt. These are people who manage kind of the pension money of a lot of Canadians, kind of very ordinary Canadians, not all rich and wealthy people. But they put some of these sort of holdings in tax havens. Why? Mark Carney explained today. It's because they don't want it to be taxed twice. Eventually, this is income that will be taxed in Canada. But if it was being taxed in terms of sort of the company that was managing the asset as it went along, Mark Carney explained, that would be a form of double taxation. And indeed, we've been kind of reading up to understand better the relationships between different big asset managers out there. And indeed, you do see kind of collaborations, joint ventures between Brookfield that he was ahead of and the Caisse de dépôt and the Teachers' Pension Plan and other kind of big players in the asset management game. And he's not wrong when he says that the strategy here is to shelter it while it's growing in the funds so that it is taxed when sort of the individual people pull it out as a form of their retirement savings. And the idea that this is only something a haven for the wealthy or for a wealthy corporation is actually misunderstanding what's really going on here in a sense, because there's a lot of like ordinary folks' pensions kind of involved in this kind of bigger investment world. So Mark Carney tried to sort of walk people through that in terms of understanding how Brookfield would be proceeding in terms of, competing for that investment business as a private sector entity. And it's food for thought then when you look at what Jagmeet Singh is saying about how, well, this is just the wealthy, tax sheltering, and sort of Mark Carney doesn't get it, and it shows he's out of touch. Like the critique from the populist left, right, against the use of tax havens generally, which of course are something that very wealthy folks do. But it's also used by the people who manage the pensions of sort of people who are very middle class. And you have to consider that in a world where people do want their retirement savings to be there for them and to rise. They want their annual returns. That's how the market works. So some complexity, some nuance added to these arguments, I think, through these news conferences this morning. Quickly on the Quebec stuff. Mark Carney admitted to misspeaking, mispronouncing the name of his new candidate, a longtime gun control advocate who was wounded in the shooting at École Polytechnique. Jagmeet Singh here asked for his response to this, sort of said this was very serious what happened, condemning Mark Carney for sort of how he misspoke. But Carney himself has apologized for that, acknowledged that he made an error, and also said, this wasn't a question of me not understanding the French. I just misspoke. He was trying to communicate to people today that he does know what happened at Polytechnique. He does actually it's interesting. Nathalie Provost did actually give an interview yesterday and did not see this as a huge issue, but there are a number of stories in the Quebec media in particular that are making a big issue of this today, on the heels of some other sort of things that were going on in Francophone reporting about Carney and the team around him being kind of more male-heavy than the team around Trudeau, and some suggestion about sort of whether there was a lack of awareness perhaps on some of the sort of kind of feminist stuff, if I could just unfairly perhaps kind of generalize that. So very interesting to see how this story is playing out in Quebec, and it's, a big story there. We will see if this is something that the Carney campaign is able to kind of work through and manage and move on to the sort of headlines it wants. But while we are talking about these two things, we're not talking about the new $1 billion fund to sort of help the supply chains get through the tariff threat, right? And the kind of message they wanted in Windsor. And that's the risk of this. It knocks you off your message of the day and gets you off talking about other stuff over here in a responsive way. And that can be a real liability in a campaign.
Janice, thanks for all this. That's CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. And of course, we know when we're talking about how this is all shaping in Quebec, we want to bring in the CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian, because we know that the Bloc Québécois leader, Yves-François Blanchet, also held a news conference this morning in Montreal. Our Rafi Boudjikanian was there listening to all of it, and how he also was responding to some of the questions that we saw raised about Mark Carney. Rafi, bring us up to speed on what we heard.
Arthi, Yves-François Blanchet's choice to have his news conference here in Montreal, specifically at this studio, was very deliberate. This is Mel's. It's the studio owned by private network TVA. It's where that now cancelled French language debate would have taken place if Mark Carney had not declined to make an appearance, if the Liberal Party had paid that $75,000 to participate in the debate. So Blanchet opened his comments this morning by reiterating that he wants Carney to reconsider and for the debate to take place after all. Blanchet has also been touching on the Polytechnique stuff you were discussing with Janice just now. He has said it's a grave error. It suggests that Carney is unaware of Quebec's history, of the significance of that event in this province. Obviously, these are all points he wants to keep alive in this campaign because he wants to use them to show himself to be the great defender of Quebec culture and heritage and history. Blanchet also was asked about the tax haven story broken by our colleague Dan LeBlanc at Radio-Canada this morning. He did say that it suggests that perhaps Mr. Carney needs to be more clear about what his conflicts of interest are. And he also sort of went into which which other candidate he would prefer working with as prime minister this morning. That started off in a private radio interview he did earlier today. He suggested that Pierre Poilievre is someone he's already familiar with, whereas there are still lots of questions about Carney. I believe he said something like, Carney seems to be this Pandora's box with surprise after surprise every day. When I asked him, who's your preferred candidate, he didn't go that far. He said he's interested in making sure that Quebec's interests are represented in Parliament. Now, keep in mind, he has started this campaign behind the Liberals in voters' intentions. But that's also where he started in 2019 and 2021, and he sort of managed to turn that around, right? Like he went to Parliament with more than 30 MPs during each of those campaigns, and he's looking to essentially pull off a hat trick against the Liberal leader who is a former goaltender.
Okay, thanks for this, Rafi. That is the CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian reporting from Quebec City.